Jenny Stonington was looking a little different yesterday.
You think? Yeah, we have our own shore frontage, that a little cove our family fishes out of. We had to lasso our camp that's by the shore and tie it to a float, and the one that was beside us floated right across the harbor.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Morning, Ann.
Good morning. How you doing?
Living the dream.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Has Commissioner Johnson joined yet?
I have not seen her join. No, not yet. I don't think she's on just yet. Would you like me to send her a message?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Give it another. We'll give it another minute.
She's on. She joined us.
Okay. Morning, Commissioner Johnson.
Morning.
I think you got a big city behind you.
Oh, I'm at the Roo this morning with the speaker.
Okay. I know we invited roughly 40 to 45 people, so I do want to give it just another minute in case people are having trouble getting on. Okay. Now we're kind of holding steady here at 26 right now. So why don't we go ahead and get things started? Jeff, why don't you turn the recorder on? We are going to record this because we do have some people that aren't going to be able to attend. So we'll share that with folks after the meeting is over. I want to thank you for joining this morning. Obviously, the coast has taken an unprecedented hit last week with those two storms. We talk about these 500-year events, but when you look at it, we've had 3 500-year events in the last decade, and 2 coming within days of each other. And creating, what looks like millions of dollars worth of damage to our working waterfront infrastructure. So Maine DMR has never been pulled into any kind of disaster response. We supply information through the FEMA process on occasion as it pertains to culverts or maybe a wharf, a singular wharf here and there, but we've certainly never seen it to the extent that we've seen here. Last week, Marine Patrol, with coordination with the Maine Forest Service, put 2 helicopters up to fly a big section of both eastern Maine, and both east of the Penobscot and west of the Penobscot. I flew the section from basically Owl's Head down to Harpswell. And it's different from the air, because what you see from the air is really just the really severe destruction. And what I continue to impress upon people who are saying, geez, I just was in this harbor and it didn't look too bad. It's like, well, you're not looking close enough, right? Because the amount of damage that can't be seen to wharfs where they've been heaved, underpinnings broke, pilings washed away, is pretty dramatic. I've been up and down the coast. Haven't been able to get everywhere yet, but certainly what I've seen is pretty daunting. Korea Harbor had, I think there's roughly 24 wharfs in Korea. 7 of them pretty much are gone or been condemned, and almost every other one has damage to it, maybe with the exception of maybe a couple. Certainly Stonington was hit hard. Down in Millbridge, I see Chipman's are on. I mean, Chipman's lost the whole end of their facility. So it's everywhere, right? Harpswell. I mean, when I flew Harpswell on the lee side of the peninsulas, this wharf's gone on the lee side, right? Just strictly from tide and surge. So like nothing we've ever seen before. So DMR is playing a supporting role. This is a MEMA-led disaster declaration that is being worked on right now, and you'll hear it stressed throughout this morning that we have one more deadline for reporting that must be met, where DMR is going to send another email out. I can't stress enough how important it is, and if you, as partners to DMR, could help get the word out on that reporting deadline, it would really be appreciated. I got a call from a fisherman this morning saying, yeah, I went up to the town and I told the town, and telling the town might get it in there, but it's not a sure thing, right? So getting that document filled out or calling 211 and having them help fill it out is really critical. And I'm sure you'll hear that from our guest speakers here today. So what I'd like to do before we get into the details, just make sure I've got everybody. Ben, you've got your hand up. Can I?
Just a quick question on your reporting timeline. If people want to report after that deadline, should we still be encouraging them to do so?
Yeah, I think Ann might be able to talk about that a little bit with more information than I can give, but that certainly has been the indication that I've gotten, if they miss the deadline, to still report, so we have that information on hand.
That is correct. Is that something you want me to address right now, or perhaps hold on?
I think you can address it. I'm going to call on you next, Ann, so maybe
Okay.
in just a second. So I just want to make sure I've got everybody. I think we're up to about 30 participants now. Just want everybody to know that we have invited our congressional delegation offices to listen in, because we've not been able to fully brief all of them yet on where things are. So we wanted them to be able to hear firsthand and hear any questions that you might have. We also have Senator Rennie and Representative Hepler, who are the chairs of the Marine Resources Committee, here listening in, and Chris Mayo from DOT is here to listen in as well. And we've had some additional conversations with DOT in this process. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Ann Fausch to kind of give the MEMA update, and then I'll go to Commissioner Johnson, and then I'll kind of talk about the DMR role. This will take 15-20 minute tops, and then make sure we leave some time for Q&A so we can try to answer any questions that we might not get to with the presentation. So with that, Ann, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Ann Fuchs. I'm the director of our Mitigation Planning and Recovery Division with Maine Emergency Management Agency. And essentially what that means is that my function and my team's function is to coordinate, facilitate recovery efforts as it pertains to our master disaster declaration process with our FEMA partners. I can go into a little bit of what that looks like, that whole process. And also, given just the magnitude of an event like this, coordinating and facilitating across all state agencies, federal partners, philanthropic community, non-governmental agencies, just to see what we can put on the table for people now versus what we need to have continued discussions about to fill gaps for unmet needs. So there's so much that goes into disaster declaration recovery or disaster recovery, excuse me, for an event of this magnitude. So starting first, just kind of where we're posturing right now as a state entity in pursuit of a major disaster declaration request. We're very, very confident that this will result in a disaster declaration request put forward by Governor Mills all the way to the president's desk, who ultimately will go through the process of reviewing and signing. In the process now, we're in what we call the initial damage assessment phase. So I think it was Ben, you brought the question of, will we accept damage assessment information after the deadline? The next one being January 22nd. We absolutely will. Just contextually, what this damage assessment information does is in our initial damage assessment, it helps the state agency just define magnitude, scope, so that we know that we effectively need to bring in our federal partners kind of for part 2 of this process, which is to validate damages, particularly across public infrastructure. And for this one, we've seen a lot of damages to businesses, of course, and also homes, rental units, so on and so forth. So we're bringing in FEMA as soon as next week to start that validation process. And we'll have 4 teams going across the state for just looking at public infrastructure. We're still assessing on the individuals and household side. With that process, we include our small business administration partners. They'll also be in the field with us starting next week. And we're just pulling together the schedules now, but you will start to see from our media partners that we've hit the ground. We've started that validation process. So that is the next step towards moving a major disaster declaration request through the governor's office. The assessment that Ben asked if there was ability to submit after, you certainly can. That information just helps us expedite when resources become available from the state down to our county partners to our town partners. So we're making sure we're getting any resources out expeditiously to disaster survivors. There's a lot of people that have been affected by this event. But we've already met the purpose and intent of that initial damage assessment phase, which was to say, whoa, this really was big, and we need to start part 2, which is to bring in our federal partners. So we certainly encourage continued submission, probably just for the next week, 2 weeks, but we've already met that initial need for the initial damage assessment. FEMA's already deploying resources as soon as Monday to come into the state. So the only purpose of really submitting at this point is to make sure any resources that are made available are delivered as fast as possible to those in need by way of that damage assessment. So there's a lot here, certainly a lot of caveats, without getting too deep into the disaster declaration process. I'll kind of stop right there and see, just kind of check in to see, where questions might be. And I can kind of take the conversation further from there, but I'll defer to the group. Ben?
Thanks, Ian. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 layers to where we are, right? Is like, one is the hope for rebuilding and the money needed to rebuild and whatnot. But the first layer of this is like just cleanup. Like, where do we see the resources being able to flow into the cleanup process first? Or like, how does that kind of work with the needs of the fishing community right now versus where we need to be getting to quickly when it comes to reinvesting, rebuilding in the infrastructure?
Great question. And it's the answer will be multi-layered. And so I should preface this first by saying there are no immediate like fiscal resources to deploy to help people out with debris cleanup, with rebuilding. So we'll kind of start there, set the tone there, unfortunately. But I mean, we do work with volunteer agencies. So if there's an inherent need across the coastline for assistance with debris cleanup, that's something that trickle up information from the damage assessments helps us to know so we can coordinate with what we call VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, to see if they have the staffing to deploy to the field to assist in those circumstances. Part two is that if any federal resources do become available, I'll even say some state resources, because, you know, we're trying to bring resources together. If that were to happen, these programs would be postured as reimbursement programs. So it's really important as everyone's going through that debris cleanup process to document everything, to include everyone's time associated with debris management and cleanup. Because ultimately, if resources do become available, those expenses may be reimbursable. So you'll just need to have effective documentation to include everything from time associated with cleanup. You know, I can speak for our federal partners on the FEMA side. They'll need to see things such as pay policies, which cleanly lay out straight time versus overtime and time dedicated to specifically clean up for this event. So specificity and documentation is crucial. Another piece to this whole conversation is building back better. In our field, we call that mitigation or resiliency. And unfortunately, that's embedded its way pretty organically into this conversation, given that we've seen so many of these events of such a devastating magnitude. There's a lot of resources that are available by way of grant programs, particularly through our office at Maine Emergency Management Agency. These are FEMA mitigation grant programs available annually. And we also get separate pots associated with each disaster so that communities can effectively apply for 75% cost share on building back better, more resilient projects. So of course, these grant programs are nuanced and they're not open to everything, but the purpose and intent of hazard mitigation assistance programs through FEMA are to help build back public infrastructure in a more resilient manner. So the next time this comes in, we don't have to go through this lengthy process of bringing FEMA in to validate and then do the disaster declaration and then the process after. It's very labor intensive. So FEMA is incentivized, and Congress as well, to make sure we're building our communities back more resiliently so that we don't have to keep, you know, going through these motions and essentially not utilizing taxpayer money to the best of our ability. Does that answer your question, Ben?
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I think that understanding where public, private opportunities, kind of where those things, I think, you know, Pat, on the cleanup front, you know, a lot of this stuff is not like more hands make light work. It is, we need equipment type of cleanup.
Right, yeah.
So I don't know where we start to have a conversation about that, Pat, but I know that I'm starting to get questions from folks about how we start to make waterways safe and, you know, protect, you know, more losses and impacts. So
Yeah, and a lot of that, Ben, I think starts at the community level as well. You know, a lot of the municipalities have been really engaged within helping clean up the harbor, you know, and tracking what that time is. So that's going to be critical. And I've talked to a lot of fishermen as far as, you know, getting ready to steam out, right? The amount of debris that's in the water and the danger that could pose as well. So yeah, those are all really critical elements. I have Senator Rennie, then Stacy Kiefer, and then Ginny.
Thank you very much. I'm Cameron Rennie. I represent Senate District 13. I have people just champing at the bit to get started with rebuilding. I have specifically with commercial fishing piers. I have one person or group of people that they have the materials and they have the labor, and what kind of building permit is that called? They were able to get, boop, 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 boop. Oh, the rule by permit.
Permit by rule,
notice.
yeah,
Permit by rule, thank you.
Yeah.
And they were going to raise it up the pier though, about 18 to 24 inches. And they were told by the DEP that they're not allowed to make it any higher. The footprint would be the same, but essentially they want to rebuild it so it has a better chance at withstanding the next one. And I'm just wondering who to contact about permitting things, and should I be telling them to wait if FEMA is coming next week to validate the damage?
I'm gonna let Ann talk about the question around waiting, but I will say that the DEP question is one that I've gotten at every stop that I've made. I had a very good conversation with Commissioner Loisem from DEP yesterday. So as you can imagine, between the December 18th storm and these last two storms, their permitting offices are overwhelmed. And their major focus right now is on personal dwellings that have been condemned, right, for health and safety, public safety reasons. But they are starting to take into account the damage on the business side to make sure people are up and running. What I have been told by the DEP commissioner, and I am waiting to get a little bit more guidance on this, is that, and I want to stress and clearly stress, there is some risk associated with this if an individual business wanted to go in this direction. But the DEP does not want to be the bottleneck here for these, especially for these repairs that need to get these buying stations operational, right? I mean, a lot of these larger buying stations need to be operational by May. So if they had to wait 2 months, they're going to be behind behind any construction window. So the DEP has enforcement discretion and understands that work is going to start before they have a permit in hand. If a business wants to accept that risk, but they build within the existing footprint, don't add buildings, don't add fuel tanks, don't add bait sheds, build back what they have to become operational, including raising the height of a facility, that they can come back to DEP either during that process or after their process, after they've done building, and then go through the permitting process.
Commissioner, I also put the new DEP storm recovery page up that just went live. So
Okay.
I put that in the chat so people can see it because it covers what you just outlined.
Oh, excellent, excellent.
Yep.
So we've been waiting to get, so that's now live. So we've been
That is
waiting
now
for
live.
that guidance. So that's great. So again, DEP doesn't want to be the bottleneck here, but I can't stress enough, right? I talked to one individual who was going to start the process, but there was going to be fill involved, right? If you are triggering an Army Corps permit, that is a whole different ballgame. And an Army Corps permit, if you go around an Army Corps permit, not only will they fine you, they could order you to remove from the water the fill that you put in, right? So just keep that in mind, and businesses should keep that in mind. But we'll make sure that we get that recent guidance out more broadly on our website as well. So that's good news from the DEP front. Stacy.
Good morning. Thank you. Stacy Kiefer, Director of the Maine Marine Trades Association. I also had some comments about permitting, and I put in the chat there that ironically LD 2030 had a public hearing on January 10th, and my interpretation of that bill is it directly addresses an emergency permit by rule to raise structures up by a couple feet. So the ENR committee had a hearing on that. I didn't know about this bill until just yesterday. I stumbled across it. But interesting, you might want to read the testimony submitted. And I'm just, for those of you in the legislature, If that could be maybe a helpful tool for us right now, if that did pass. It seems like it was ironically posed to maybe address some of these issues. Maybe it's not perfect yet, but maybe since it's already in the pipeline, it could help us out. I also, and I'm not an expert on this and don't quote me either, but one of our members is a marine contractor, and there are very few of them considering the amount of damage we have in the state. But that contractor out of Portland, Custom Float Services, said if you have 50% or less damage to a structure, that you only need a permit from the town. And I don't know if this applies in all towns, so maybe the municipal association can verify for us that up to 50% can get rebuilt the same as it was without a DEP permit, just a town permit. So that would maybe help expedite some things. So I'm just passing that along. But again, I don't have the statutes or whatever to back that up, but it's worth us checking into. And then my third item that I just wanted to mention, again, talking to that marine contractor, as many of you are probably aware and have heard, the timeline on this is just as painful as the costs and the agony of just the initial loss, is the wait we're all going to have. And that one contractor alone, I have not reached out to some others yet, but said they were already booked 12 to 18 months out. I hear from members in the boatyards that, you know, they've been waiting for a year to have some pilings driven. So I'm just putting that out there. Certainly, thankfully, this contractor said they are going to prioritize commercial businesses, especially their existing customer commercial businesses over private, because they're very civic minded and want to see people get back up to business as quickly as possible. And I don't know, I don't know that we can force that to happen through all our marine contractors. It would be nice to say you have to prioritize that. But one area, and this is outside of my wheelhouse and expertise, but is one area I was hoping we could collaborate and help is to perhaps do some bulk purchasing to figure out so that those smaller wharves that maybe only need 2 or 3 pilings are not paying top dollar compared to those who maybe need 100. I don't know what the need is out there. So I just want to let everyone on this call know that working with MLA and MCFA to put together a survey that I think goes at a different level and then what MEMA does is more of a shopping list of, you know, because this isn't you don't get marine grade plywood everywhere or marine grade lumber everywhere. You can't go get pilings at Home Depot and Lowe's. You know, this is some specialty equipment. And if we can somehow collaborate and do some bulk purchasing so that when the contractor is able to get to someone's job, that they even have the supplies, because I'd hate to see them, the supplies hold things up. And if Florida has another devastating Hurricane Ian, well, we're still trying to rebuild, then we go in competition with that, you know. So it's just an idea of how we may all be able to collaborate. So I'm open to suggestions on how to frame that bulk purchasing. Actually, someone at Sea Grant said they know Maine Coast Heritage Trust has helped do that for some farmers. So I'm going to reach out to them for maybe some model suggestions on how to do some bulk purchasing. But it's just a way that maybe we as associations can help. And then my last thing, sorry to take up so much time, and maybe this is for Chris Mayo, in the working waterfront emails that come through and sources of funding. My understanding is there are federal DOT grants called RAISE grants that are for can be for coastal infrastructure. And is there a way that, you know, at least the municipalities perhaps at this point can work with your department to get something submitted? I don't know if that's just a revolving timeline or not, so. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can speak on the raise grant opportunities real quick, Pat, if that's okay.
Sure.
So raise grants are a nationally competitive grant program through USDOT. Generally, it's beneficial to have Maine DOT sign on as a joint applicant for those. That does not preclude municipalities or other organizations that qualify for that grant program to apply on their own. As of right now, the grant closes February 28th for this round of raise grant. It's unlikely that a polished application can be drafted in the period of time between now and that closing. However, that doesn't mean that individual municipalities or organizations that qualify can't forward that effort on their own. As far as, a longer timeline for maybe the next fiscal year funding cycle of raise, probably the best course of action would be to fully vet and get preliminary specs and estimates together for any raise grant project that is on the radar of a municipality or an organization. And if it's marine structures and piers and wharving, please engage me early and often in that process so that I can assist in the planning and designs and forward along towards the appropriate folks to help out in that application process, as well as Maine DOT vetting of the process for potential joint applications.
Okay, thanks for that. Can I just add, in my mind, we have a lot of qualified grant writers in the state, and maybe a quick and dirty grant application, you never know if someone's ready to do that. And even if it's not perfect, that probably doesn't stop them from resubmitting next year, and at least gets a foot in the door and get the process started. Just a thought.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. Given the situation in the state and the emergency positioning that we're all in on the waterfront, I don't believe that even a grant that's put in, in haste and cobbled together before the deadline would be counted against the applicant in the future. I think there will be understanding that there's a lot of moving pieces and this is all real-time stuff, and we're all doing the best we can to rebuild.
Great, thank you. I do want to try to stay focused on kind of the direction or the assistance FEMA potentially can have, or MEMA can have at this time. So Ginny, do you have some questions specific for Ann, and then we'll go from there?
I'm fine with you moving on. I can save mine till the end.
Okay, great. Any additional questions then for Ann around MEMA and FEMA process? Senator Rennie.
Sorry, I'm just realizing I'm not sure I got an answer of if people should not be fixing anything until FEMA comes and validates it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for circling back to that one, Senator. FEMA would never encourage a municipality or private infrastructure to wait on anything. They want to ensure everybody's taking the appropriate measures to ensure life safety, build back, do whatever you need to do. However, the caveat is, as a reimbursement program, what they will be looking at is that whatever protective measures or constructive measures were taken under the instruction and permitting of DEP and U.S. Army Corps. So they'll be specifically looking for that. I want to be clear, there's a lot of private infrastructure questions on this call, and FEMA won't be able to come in and offer reimbursement for private entities. It's only for public infrastructure. So again, the information Commissioner Kelleher gave the group about DEP and U.S. Army Corps, just make sure to kind of separate those two out and apply them to your situation, whether it be across private or public. But from FEMA's perspective, wait on nothing. Just know in advance for public infrastructure, they will be needing to see appropriate measures were taken as they pertain to Maine DEP and U.S. Army Corps.
Great, thanks. And as I continue to tell everybody, document, right? Before, during, after, to make sure that you have a clear accounting, both a photographic accounting and a financial accounting of what's being done. So, Andy, do you have any more you want to share before I turn it over to Commissioner Johnson?
I'd just like to share, since Building Back Better is like, this is our moment. The grant programs I spoke about through FEMA, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program. There's a new one called Swift Current. Go to our website for more information about those. There are opportunities where municipalities can sponsor individuals, homes, and private entities. The municipal level is the eligible applicant, but I just want that to be understood that there is potential opportunity if your town is inherently interested in investing themselves in this process, they would serve as an eligible applicant. So that's a conversation to have with your municipality, because these grant programs are available, but that would be the avenue to which we could see some projects move forward. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ann. I think next we'll move on to Commissioner Johnson. They're going to talk about what's in her wheelhouse within DECD, and then answer a few more questions, and then I'll talk about kind of the efforts on the DMR side. Commissioner.
There we go. Thanks. So as you heard Ann say, a lot of the FEMA work, right, is around public infrastructure, roads, bridges, and other things. The Small Business Administration is probably one of the best avenues for business support at this point from a federal level. They have similar impact statements. So Maine Emergency Management and Ann's team will be gathering information and likely submit an application for an SBA declaration as well. If that is approved, it's approved by county. And so as long as the county is accepted into the declaration by the Small Business Administration, those are low interest patient capital. So generally amortized over a 30-year period and are low interest. But again, they are loans, which I know isn't necessarily what businesses are looking for in this moment, given kind of the devastation they're in the middle of. At the same point, what we have seen are a number of businesses utilize that tool just to stabilize themselves and then kind of work to other options as they go forward. So the timing on that, and maybe you can jump in there, but it goes with this other FEMA timing, right? It will take some time. Those loans aren't eligible. Those loans aren't open today. I can put a program overview though in the chat so you all can see what is likely eligible in the event there is a declaration. Again, there are multiple steps that need to happen before we feel confident this is a program we'll be able to utilize, or you all will be able to utilize. But that is kind of the primary tool at this point. I will say one of the other things, and we've been trying to do some of this work with the December 18th storm as well, is really thinking about kind of resiliency as businesses particularly try to rebuild. And we saw some really dramatic differences in businesses. And again, December 18th, because that's what we have data, the December 18th storm, because we have a lot of information from that at this point versus some of the coastal flooding. Layout, format of buildings, other things made significant differences in the types of impacts, particularly manufacturers were seeing. And so, I think as we work on recovery efforts, we want to try to do what we can to support homeowners, communities, and businesses to think about that piece, right? Like, how do you don't necessarily put back, Commissioner Keller was talking about building piers higher potentially, right? There are a lot of avenues here. It's really hard to have that discussion in a moment of disaster and emergency. Also, we want to try to do that where we can, so that to work with folks on that where we can, so that they aren't experiencing this on a routine basis in the next few years as well. So I'd say those are two big challenges. The governor has pulled together the Climate Council to meet next week and have some of that discussion, again, really to lean in on resiliency as part of a recovery effort. We've met with the folks from Vermont and some other states that have had similar kind of wide scale emergency actions and are trying to learn from some of their actions as well. So that's kind of where we are right now. Kind of what Ann was saying before, there's not a lot of immediate funding. And that's a really difficult message right now because people need that help to do the cleanup work, Ben, that you were talking about, even to just kind of get righted and back into business locations and homes. And so, we are looking at other streams. But at this point, MEMA is in the lead working with FEMA to try to access as many federal funds. And I don't know if we go back to for a second, if you can talk a little bit to set the stage for what FEMA funds look like, right? Those are really about stabilization. They aren't about full recovery or some of those things. So we just want to make sure that people are kind of having understanding kind of what that support will look like over the course of time too.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So the public assistance program, which is the one that kind of reflects on public infrastructure damages in a major event, they're broken down into categories. And so there's kind of like the emergency protective measures categories, which is debris management, and also actual emergency protective measures. So that's time associated with, let's say, your local police putting up barricades, jersey barriers, road signs, all those expenses are eligible under the emergency protective measures side of the public assistance program. Then there's categories C through G, which essentially cover categories to include damage to roads and bridges, water treatment utilities. Let's see, we have, what are the ones am I missing? Excuse me. Roads and bridges is usually our major one. Utilities, and then management costs associated with it. But again, it's a reimbursement program. And so when we say disaster relief coming into the state, it's actually just a kind of, the relief is to kind of reimburse some of those expenses, 75% federal, 15% state contribution, back to the municipal level or county entity or state entity. So only for public infrastructure. But then the small business administration side, to kind of go off what Commissioner Johnson was saying, is coming into the state with FEMA next week. So these teams all talk to each other, and they're going to perform that validation of damages next week. That means whatever we're able to validate across each respective county is going to define what we can put in our major disaster declaration request for assistance. There's different avenues to pursue small business administration disaster loans, and anything we're not able to effectively fit in that major disaster declaration request because of stipulations associated with FEMA programs, we'll put an alternate request forward after to make sure no matter what, all these coastal communities are gaining access to SBA loans, which will assist with the private infrastructure side of the house. Did I offer clarity, or was that probably more confusion?
I think, and what I was hoping for there, which I think you did great, was like, these aren't, right? Sometimes there's a preconceived notion about what federal funding will do and be, and
Yeah.
this concept of stabilizing the situation is really the outcome here, which, again, just so there's clear expectations.
The biggest thing to keep in mind, and I'll just keep driving it home, is that it's a reimbursement program. So nobody's necessarily going to get just a check up front to kind of cover expenses associated with bringing in a bucket loader to help remove debris from the coastline. Everything really is fronted by private and public entities. And then FEMA comes in under the stipulations of their grant programs to offer reimbursement to kind of alleviate some of the pressures, the fiscal pressures associated with what communities just experienced.
Thanks, Ann. Anything else to add, Commissioner Johnson?
No,
Ginny, you've
thank
got your hand back up. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, in Stonington, we've been working with the climate resiliency. We have, our island is basically a bunch of bridges and causeways that connect each one of these islands together. So the Oceanville Causeway, for one, which would greatly impact Hugh Reynolds, he's got a buying station on the other side of this causeway. We've done all the work to plan to have a new causeway put in. But now that we've had this storm and all this damage is done, we're back to ground zero at planning for this causeway. So I think even though some of this is private versus public, those things really go hand in hand. And should we be looking to maybe like a restoration act or another climate resiliency act federally to make sure that we can rebuild our infrastructure?
Yeah, I think, Jenny, I think that's a great point. I spent a lot of time talking with your town manager about that particular facility in the build out, using the Northern Border Commission dollars to do that design work, right? And you get the design work done, and then you realize it's nowhere near enough based on the volume of water that went through there and had to then turn around and come back out, right? So I think it's highlighted the fact that, you know, the programs that we have looking at these major storm events are likely not enough. And certainly those broader conversations about what else do we potentially need from Congress in the long term are things that we're all considering. And I think we have to kind of put it on the list for kind of the next steps about long-term resiliency and adapting to that climate change. You know, Ann talked about it, Commissioner Johnson talked about it, right? Any state or federal dollars that are potentially going to go in on the private side for rebuilding, thinking more long-term are going to have, you know, it's a fiduciary responsibility spending taxpayer money. So we're going to want to see that build back is better than it was. That being said, on the short term, right? And this is what I'm running into everywhere I'm going. It's like, we've got to get operational by May. You know, we've got to have little fixes right now. You know, a lot of the conversations I'm having are like building back, knowing we're going to get wet. So at least the structure that is going to be built in the short term to get through this next period of times, you know, whether it's 2 months or 2 years, at least if the facility knows that it's going to get wet, that it'll withstand that type of storm event until we can get to the point to find the dollars that are needed to build back higher and more resilient to that 500-year storm, right? So those are the conversations that I think are going to be really, really critical going forward. And it's one of the reasons I wanted the delegation staff to kind of listen in to understand what those concerns are. So,
I've been hearing from a bunch of municipalities that they're having a hard time tracking the folks that are filing either through like the emergency declaration, because there's a few different avenues that they can file through. Has anyone else heard any of that?
and I think I know. I mean, I know there's one town that the municipal side, they've got a form that's going up through to the county that has a little bit more detail than the more generic form that we're also asking people to fill out.
So there's 3 in total. And there's one we have intentionally kept with our municipal partners. So we've not advertised this one, but that one is for the public infrastructure. And so municipal responsibility to kind of understand, comprehend, aggregate information as to what the damages are across their town. That one is being worked through towns to the county and then respectively up to the state level. The ones that we've been putting out publicly via numerous channels. So I do recognize it can be confusing. It's all the same assessment. There's one for business and agriculture, and it's been pumped out by way of Maine Emergency Management Agency, the governor's office, DMR, DECD. That's all the same survey. It's just being broadcast on a wide network. And then the third one is the individuals and households damage assessment survey. And those are the ones we've leaned into all of our partners to help us get out widely and broadly to make sure everyone has the opportunity to submit a damage assessment if they want, but it's all the same assessment. So perhaps that's the confusion you might be alluding to, but in essence, it's the same survey just being pumped out in a wide network.
So is there, excuse me, is there a way that the municipality can track those filings so they know as a community what their damage is?
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. So all of this information, even though we're collecting it, it's trickled back down, if you will, as well. So from municipal damages to individuals and households to business and agriculture, our county EMA directors have automatic access to this information, and they pass it back down to their town level. So they have 100% visibility on all damages within that local level.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good questions, Jenny. Ben, where'd you go? My screen just changed around. There you are. Go ahead.
Thanks, Pat. So one of the pieces that I'm having a little bit of a hard time just following, and it would be helpful to have a document that outlines it, is just, it sounds like a lot of this is public, like how we fix public property and impacts. Majority of our working waterfronts that were really badly destroyed and lost are private. And I'm not hearing a lot of hope for quick help or response on that side. Pat, we probably don't have time today, but I do think that at some point we probably should sit down and think creatively around what some options would be to help reinvest and support that, you know, the path that you're kind of suggesting, which is this is going to be a Band-Aid for a period of months or years. But you know, I don't think people understand that right now, both within our communities and within the fishing community, just what this help may or may not be able to do. And, you know, those that do are scared, right? And I think there's a lot of fear right now. There's a lot of hopelessness feelings. And so I don't know what some of the options, creative options might be when it comes to low interest loans, revolving loan funds, money from the state, money from the feds. If we need to go and hit every foundation in the state to set up something to help like get us between now and then. But, you know, I think that if there is an industry and working waterfront response and request that we need to be collectively identifying as a next step, I'd really love to have that next conversation at some point in the near future, because there are a lot of people that care, and we need to figure out how to point that care in the appropriate place in the short term. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Ben, that's a lot of what our internal conversations are starting to kind of revolve around, right? I'm expecting to see something within the supplemental budget that will be announced in early February. To what extent that will be, I don't know, but I know Commissioner Johnson is, and I know I am having extensive conversations with the governor's office to look at all avenues on the state side, right? The state's never going to be able to create that big pot of money on the private side, but if we can find some, I'm focused really on the immediate need on the state side, right? And whether that's a revolving loan fund or some, you know, emergency pot of money for working waterfront, those are the conversations that I'm having with the governor and the governor's office. And I'm not sure how that will play out, because we've got DHHS and education and everything else that needs to be funded. And so I do know, though, from talking to the governor, that she's looking very carefully. The budget was almost done, right? So now they've disassembled the supplemental to relook at how they can try to figure out how to help, which is going to be key. But the big answer is yes to the conversation about having kind of that big tent community meeting about what do we need to do long term. There are 2 bills in Congress right now that deal with working waterfront on the Senate side and on the House side. Are they perfect for this? Maybe not, but maybe something to be looking at as well. And then that resiliency component, right? I mean, this is I don't want to say we were caught with our pants down around our knees, but we were caught with our pants down around our knees a little bit. Whoever thought we were going to have two storms like this back to back, right? So we have to take this as the aha moment to say, what's next? What's next? So, Amber Jean, you've been patient. Your hand is up.
Thanks. I have more of a question about communication. Looking back at the surveys, it seems that having an email address, having computer access, all of that is really vital to this process. And we have a lot of members, and specifically just this general demographic who isn't tech savvy, isn't comfortable, and are having challenges with that. So we did call the 211 number yesterday on behalf of somebody to see if we could help, and their answer was, we'll send you a link in an email to the survey. So I'm just wondering, like, what is our communication process? What are your suggestions? And then follow up on that, I'm assuming that once these things are processed, they'll probably get information through a website, an email, of, you know, some sort of technology again. So for those members who, or demographics that don't have that access, what's our backup plan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know Jeff Nichols, our communications director, has been kind of thinking in that line about how do we expand those communications. I'm a little bit troubled what you just said about 211, because it was our indication that they would help fill those forms out. So I'm glad you raised that. We will go back to them to find out why that was responded to the way it was. That's very problematic. Because that is supposed to be the avenue for people to get that kind of assistance. So we'll go back to that. But you know, I would say, you know, any of the major things, right, to your point, we're going to put on our website, MEMA will put on their website, DECD will put on their website, and then we'll pump information out through Gov Delivery. But if, you know, through the Landings newspaper or any of the organizations that have newsletters that can get that information out in a written format, that certainly would be helpful. So if you've got ideas, I would say share them directly with Jeff Nichols, and we can communicate around that. And
one of the, sorry, Pat, if I can just jump in, one of the deployment things that SBA does is they actually will put people in some of the local communities, and they'll help businesses fill out applications. So if and when, I guess I should say, if and when that happens, you know, we can try to communicate that, and maybe even at the local level do a better job communicating that, because they'll sit down and literally they bring in their own IT and they'll sit down and help people fill things out, which I think is really helpful in that moment. So that is available and likely will be coming.
great, Anne.
Yeah, just to follow up, on the 211 main piece, I inherently agree that is the purpose and function. And so we'll circle back on that for the damage assessment submission part of the process. I will say we're doing this for the December 18th storm, and we would follow suit similar for these two events as well, January 10th and January 13th, if they were declared for individuals and households assistance specifically, which is also inclusive of Small Business Administration. When you're declared for individual assistance, that activates the opening up of what we call disaster recovery centers. And so every program entity you've declared in your major disaster, to include crisis counseling, disaster legal services, Small Business Administration, is housed within these like physical disaster recovery centers. When it comes to, you know, the equity piece here, which we're very cognizant of, is probably not most represented in the damage assessment portion. It's what we use 211 main for. But when it comes to resources that are available, I can speak for FEMA. When we have that declaration, we're putting it out in every web channel, if you will, using our media partners, going door to door, knocking doors on every community, publishing information in multiple languages. And so, you know, also open to further suggestions, but we're very cognizant of that piece. It's just at this point, there aren't resources to pump out to communities, but the email platform, phone numbers is one avenue, but we also lean really hard into our municipal partners to ensure their community members are taken care of as well. And they're also following suit with ensuring all portions of the population, from hearing impaired visual impairment, whomever might be within that community are appropriately represented. So coming together as a network to make sure we're doing everything we can across every channel to get information out there once we have it.
Great. I got a couple other hands up. I'm gonna go to Sebastian and then Sheila, and then I will report out kind of some of the work we've been doing here at DMR. Sebastian.
Yep, thank you, Commissioner. Very quickly to Commissioner Johnson, the SBA disaster declaration on a county by county basis. Do you know if those loans would be available retroactively? In other words, if the damage occurred before the county declaration was made, would you still qualify for those loans as a small business?
So my understanding, and feel free to jump in here, is as long as it's after the storm, as long as storm related, right? It happened as a result of the storm. It can go back to those dates. So like December 18th, and you just rattled off the other two dates. So it can go back to the date of the storm. So it can predate the declaration, but not predate the storm.
Okay, so just to
I just
Pat's
worry.
point earlier, we
Yeah,
need to document, right?
that's right.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay.
absolutely. And I am sorry, I need to jump off. But Commissioner, if there are other follow up, I'm happy to follow up after.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you all.
Appreciate you joining. Sheila Dassett.
Well, listening to everything, and I am taking down notes on it, it's kind of mind-boggling in a sense. Question, this is just food for thought. Is it possible to have a representative go to some of these hard-hit communities, such as Stonington and Beals Island, places like that, much like you did when they were introducing the LEADS program? Just as a guidance representation for people that don't, a lot of our people don't have internet or even iPhone connections with that. It's just a thought.
Yeah, Sheila, I think that's where, if the disaster declaration is implemented, I think that's what Ann is saying, that there would be those boots on the ground within the community. So we have to wait to get to that point. Certainly, DMR staff will be available to help answer those questions that are more pertinent to us. And we're going to try to get some additional stuff out online as well. But we can talk more about what DMR's role would be. But much of this is outside of our wheelhouse, other than some of the focused work that we're going to do right now. Just while I've got the floor, so from a DMR standpoint, right? I mean, all the conversations I've been having within the fishing community, you can, the frustration is at a fever pitch, and I think my staff will tell you my frustration is at a fever pitch, because there is nothing out there really that is designed to be ready for this type of disaster that takes care of that kind of short-term need, right? It falls on the individual business that has potentially a little bit of capital in their accounts or has a credit line to be able to start doing some of that work. Certainly the conversations we've been having with DEP and the response that we're getting from the DEP commissioner is very welcomed, as far as trying to get that initial work done immediately to get people operational, right? And sometimes operational is going to be just so you can run a forklift out onto that pier, versus getting that pier raised up 2 feet and being ready for the next storm. So we understand there's a difference here between the short term, we need to be operational, versus long term, we need to be resilient. So DMR is trying to look at both of those avenues. There will be our website will be updated later today. I've been having conversations with the Finance Authority of Maine, FAME, Finance Authority of Maine, and there's too many new acronyms jumping around here all the time. So FAME was very responsive to us as far as getting us information about potential programs that they have. These are loan programs, right? They're not relief programs, but they are programs that may be beneficial to a business in the short term. The good thing about the Finance Authority of Maine is they are usually willing to take some additional risk from a financial standpoint. So that information will be made available later today. DECD also provided us a list of other resources similar to those low interest potential loan programs. They're not necessarily for a lot of money, but they may be just enough to help with some of the initial startup work that a business might have. Obviously, it takes time to go through those processes. So Jeff is updating all of that information on our website to be able to get out to the industry. And we would encourage you all to share it directly on your web pages as well. The insurance piece of this on the webinar that we had earlier this week, Anne really made to drive home the point, start with your insurance companies. Everybody has been starting with their insurance companies. And from what I'm hearing, everybody is being told, we're not covering this. It's an act of God. Most people do not have flood insurance. So in the state of Maine, we have a board of insurance. The Board of Insurance, if you know an individual whose claim has been denied for personal or liability kind of insurances associated with the storm, not flood related, then the Board of Insurance could potentially be a resource for appealing any decisions from those insurance companies. The flood component, the flood insurance is a federal program. Right, so the Board of Insurance does not have any oversight over flood insurance. So from that standpoint, the links that we'll provide will have a link if there was a flood insurance claim and an individual had flood insurance and it's denied, then there is a whole process on the federal side, and we'll make sure that those resources are available and those contacts are available. And Jeff will get those up on our link as well. And then lastly, as I said, Chris Mayo is here from DOT. I had a good conversation with Commissioner Van Note this morning. It's that square peg round hole, but the DOT commissioner is trying to see if we can align that round hole and maybe knock some edges off us to see if we can have a little bit of assistance and help from a DOT standpoint. So Chris and Meredith are will be engaged in some conversations, and anything that comes out of those, we'll certainly make sure that we pass along. And then lastly, just to reiterate, the governor is looking very hard at the supplemental budget to see if there's some short-term programs here. And we will certainly pass along that. My guess is there'll be some information. January 30th is when the state of the state will be given. My guess is she may release some of the information in her state of the state address, and then the full supplemental budget would be released in the first week in February. And I'd look to Meredith or Deidre or Jeff to see if I've missed anything on my end.
I know we're over time, Pat. Did you want to say anything about fisheries disaster relief and?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So we had a team here at DMR that spent a lot of time looking at the guidance from NOAA on fisheries disaster relief, only to find out that all of the information over the weekend that we were looking at is all outdated and should have been removed from their website months ago. As you know, we do have experience with federal fisheries disasters as it pertains to a resource disaster. This is obviously not a resource disaster. This is an infrastructure disaster. That being said, it could, on the lobster side, still create a loss of revenue for individuals. So we are going to look at that very closely, but you have to show 12 months of lost revenue. So we wouldn't even be able to apply for that until over a year from now. But we are going to track that information very closely through landings to see if we're going to see any kind of decline from a revenue standpoint. just aside from the revenue standpoint, I've had a lot of questions about the lobster resource itself. If there was a decline in the lobster resource associated with the storm, it would be picked up, one, in landings, but picked up in the assessment work that we do. This is another winter storm, right? We don't think there's a resource related component to this, but for some reason, I'm getting a lot of questions on that from the press right now. We also have a meeting on Monday with economic and community development on the DC side for disaster relief. That is on the initial conversation that Meredith and I will be having with them. They do have a disaster component excuse me, I misspoke. It's through EDA, and they do have a disaster relief component associated with storms. We're going to be looking at that. It looks like mostly on the municipal side. But we'll certainly be talking with the delegation staff associated with any efforts that we have there to see if there is another potential avenue for disaster declaration through another agency. So that's quickly where DMR is. We're continuing to turn stones over, and anything that we get in the interim, we will continue to post through the website and pump out to all of you folks. I've got so a couple hands just went up, Ginny and then Ben.
Just as far as future planning, are we looking at anything like what is Florida and the Gulf Coast doing for their hurricanes? Could we be taking, $1 from any municipal registration, sales of property, vehicle purchases to create a fund that would be used for this type of climate issue, resiliency issue again? I think that may be something for a future conversation, but I wanted to put it on the table. And Pat, when you had mentioned the dealers having equity and lines of credit, I think that yes, they and we do, but an issue with that is when it's time to actually start operating in the spring, our credit line to purchase product won't be there. So we'll be in a hole that we have to dig out.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Jenny, right? I mean, I understand it's going to be different for every business, right? It's not a one size fits all, but you'd have to lean on that type of stuff at some point. And then hopefully we can find some other sources to help fill in the blanks. And we definitely need to put a pin in that kind of broad concept idea as far as some sort of an account that could be created for this type of work, whether it's a revolving loan fund or an account that would build up over time for grants towards resiliency, right? I think that's going to be critical on the state side and on the federal side. Ben.
Thanks, Pat. Just two quick things. The first one is MCFA has set up a fund for donations for individuals or businesses that would like to donate to the cause. We don't know how those funds are going to be used. Part of the survey that we're trying to conduct with Marine Trades and MLAs to figure out how to best use whatever funds we get to help the businesses, the seafood focused businesses working waterfront. And so whether that is thinking about, insurance premiums or, helping with debt, whatever those things might be, like if folks have ideas, I don't know how much money we're going to be able to raise, but we're trying to kind of keep ringing that bell. So if there are folks that are asking for places to go, that's a spot, and we're happy to work with the team to figure out how to best deploy that money as we figure that out. The second thing, Pat, is more for the delegation, but my understanding was that the fisheries disaster guidelines were supposed to be reviewed in October of last year, and I don't believe that NOAA ever did that. And that might be, our friends down in the Gulf of Mexico have been banging on that for a while, saying it doesn't fit and work with them. And so that might be a place that we can put a little bit of leverage on NOAA, and potentially, it's not going to be a fix for right now, but I think that this is shining a pretty bright light on how that doesn't work for places like Maine and the Gulf states when disasters strike and hit our fisheries. So.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. We spent about 2 hours with a whole team from Florida Fish and Wildlife, who it's their whole disaster team. I mean, they've had disaster declarations open without being funded for over 4 years now. And what is clear by these changes in federal statutes is they're trying to push NOAA wants to retain the disaster focused on resource and not storms, right? And I think we've clearly shown through this process that that's not a good model, right? So I think we're gonna need to go back and revisit that. I know we're way over time, and I'm gonna give the last word here to Jason Joyce, because he looks like he's not on Swan's Island, but I know that can't be true.
That's an old picture. In regards to the resource issue, something that's concerned me is I took my last 50 traps up right after that storm previous to January 10th. It was at the end of December. And I know some guys had boats go ashore and whatnot. In 180 feet of water in those 50 traps, I had about 40 dead lobsters. My cousin Josh, he took up his last load at that time, and he had dead lobsters in 270 feet. And I wonder, I'm concerned, the storm surge that came with these last 2 storms, probably the reason the lobsters died in the traps is because the traps are getting pummeled on the bottom and mud and whatnot. But I am concerned from a resource standpoint, what may have happened to lobsters inside of 200 feet of water during these last 2 storms. I'm hoping that they hunker down and they survive, but I'm concerned what the effect will be.
Yeah, I talked to Carl and Kathleen a little bit about that, right? About making sure that if we're getting reports, that we're documenting that, but certainly we'll be, ultra focused on the assessment work that we're going to be doing starting in the spring. But I appreciate you bringing that up. Listen, I know we're out of time. I mean, I'm looking at a lot of faces on here, and I know Huey got hit hard. I know the Chipmans got hit hard. I mean, there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to kind of rewrite themselves to get to a point where they're operational again. We'll continue to do what we can to provide information. As I said at the beginning, Ann lives this every storm and every disaster declaration, but this at this scale, it's certainly new to DMR, and it's certainly new to the coast. We've been talking now for many years about the need to be resilient. We have a working waterfront program that purchases covenants, and we know that some of these dollars have been used to build back facilities in a way that makes them more resilient. And a few of them I think can learn from because they stayed together, within this particular storm. So we're also on our coastal program side, we're gonna look at some general guidance as far as building back, right? There were 10 pilot projects in Penobscot Bay. We'll be looking at those projects to see if there's any information that's transferable kind of across the coast. Usually these are all one size fits all rebuilds for a resiliency standpoint, right? Depth of water, the direction and current, where they're facing, all of these factors play into how a dock should be built back to be more resilient. And so if we have some information at hand that's in more general terms that we can share for rebuilding in the short term, we're going to make sure we get that information out. So I know we'll be talking more about that internally next week, and it may be something we can pull together over the next month with some handful of engineers that we're working on that pilot project work. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining here today. We will continue to get information out. If you found this helpful, we can later on try to pull together, as we learn more, we can pull together another one of these in the future. But in the meantime, I would ask everybody to be safe, try to maintain a level of patience. I'm not even patient with myself right now because it is frustrating, because there's no easy avenue here. But we're going to continue to look for some programs that can create at least some short-term relief or a pot of money to at least aid in that effort. So with that, thank you very much. And I hope you all can try to have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.